So we've been going over the modes of mechanical ventilation. We've talked about assist control, SIMV, CMV, whether it's a spontaneous breath that the individuals are taking. So I wanted to do a video and kind of compare SIMV with pressure control, show you with the settings that we've talked about. It's kind of like I mentioned in class. If you get, this is the Care Fusion Avia. If you get to the point to where you can operate one ventilator, you should be able to operate any other ventilator. The analogy that I gave was I give you the keys to my car. Chances are you've never driven my car, but if you have your license and so forth and you know how to drive, you can probably figure it out. Different bells and whistles, different buttons, so to speak. There's always invariably the question that comes out, is it a stick shift? And I can appreciate that. But each ventilator is going to have different nuances or what have you. But let's just take a peek at the user interface here. We've talked about that. We are in pressure SIMV. We can see that we're in pressure control SIMV, so that's synchronized intermittent mandatory ventilation pressure control. These are going to be our measured parameters here. You can also access your screens button, pull up the monitors, and then you can look at other things as well. But we understand that we're looking for measured parameters and we're looking at set parameters. Those set parameters on the bottom of the screen. So for instance, pressure control SIMV. Remember, if you're in pressure control ventilation, your pressure is constant while your volume is variable. So your pressure is going to remain constant from breath to breath, but your volume can be variable depending upon what your airway resistance is and what your lung compliance is. So remember the relationships with airway resistance and what it would do with your peak inspiratory pressure, and lung compliance relationship, what it would do your peak inspiratory pressure. So if you have a reduction in lung compliance, typically that would cause an increase in your peak inspiratory pressure. Now in pressure control, we can pretty much have control over that. So we are setting the pressure that we want to have. In volume control ventilation, your volume is constant while your pressure is variable. So to go back to those concepts with compliance and resistance, if you're just fundamentally understanding those increments, an increase in airway resistance should cause an increase in your peak inspiratory pressure. If we're in volume control ventilation, a decrease in compliance should cause an increase in your peak inspiratory pressure. In pressure control, it is possible. In pressure control, we are setting what we want our pressure to be. So for instance, here you see an inspiratory pressure here of 18. We also see a PEEP of 6. Add those together, our total PIP collectively should be roughly about 24. It's measuring between 18 and 23 here. So I may possibly have a leak. The test lung that I have is not the absolute best. But nonetheless, my volume waveform would tend to indicate maybe there's a slight leak to an extent as well. But nonetheless, SIMV pressure control ventilation. What we will set in pressure control SIMV, you will set a respiratory rate. That's going to dictate pretty much your total cycle time. So at a rate of 10, I have a 6-second cycle time. If you'll notice down here, I've got an inspiratory time set of 1 second. So with an inspiratory time of 1 second, I told you that 10 into 60 is going to give us a 6-second cycle time. So this pretty much leaves us 1 second of inhalation, 5 seconds of exhalation. Currently, as is right now, a 1:5 ratio, which is set by the ventilator. In this mode of ventilation, every 6 seconds, this machine is going to fire a breath at 18 centimeters of water pressure and what the PEEP is for this particular patient. It's also going to receive the FiO2 that we have there. We've also got the flow trigger. We've talked about that as well. So with mechanical ventilation, you have a trigger variable, you have a limit variable, and you have a cycle. So a trigger, a limit, and a cycle. Trigger is what starts the breath. Limit is pretty much the constraints or the confines of what can happen during that breath. And then the cycle is what's going to allow that breath to be terminated so the patient go from inspiration to expiration. In SIMV pressure control, you will notice a tab show up here that does not show up in assist control pressure control. So this patient has the ability to breathe spontaneously in between or synchronized with the 10 breaths that this machine has delivered. So every 6 seconds, this machine is going to give a breath. So at 2 seconds, it gave a breath. At 8 seconds, it gave a breath, and so on and so on. So every 6 seconds, as long as my patient is not breathing spontaneously, and that test lung does not have the ability to breathe spontaneously, the machine's going to fire a breath. The patient can breathe spontaneously in this mode of ventilation, and those spontaneous breaths will be helped, if you will, from the ventilator with whatever you dial in as your pressure support. So if I give a pressure support of 5, and I'm going to change it, so you'll notice here that we have a spontaneous minute ventilation, and it's reading 0.0. Our exhaled tidal volume, for all intents and purposes, is roughly 280 cc's or 290 cc's, and you know that minute ventilation is respiratory rate times tidal volume, and it calculates our minute ventilation for us at about at 2.9 liters per minute for this particular setup that we have. But we'll also notice that there's a 0.0 liter per minute spontaneous minute ventilation. Why is that? Because our set frequency and our measured frequency equal. This patient is not triggering any over the set breath. Now, if I were to come over here to this lung and trigger some breaths, I'm going to cause it to alarm because it's changing a little bit of how I've set those alarms. But anyway, I've triggered some patient. Now notice that because I triggered that 0.3 liters per minute and the rate went up to 14 or 15. We'll kind of just set these out a little bit for the time being. So the respiratory rate went from 10 to 15. Now that I'm no longer triggering those breaths, it's going to calm back down. Let me see if I can pull up specifically this monitor screen and show a spontaneous tidal volume. We'll just change that to spontaneous tidal volume. Spontaneous exhaled tidal volume is what I want to see there. So now I'll try to trigger a breath with my left hand, and we'll start to see a number in that spontaneous tidal volume. So 130 right there on that breath. So if you get to a situation on your board exam where you're trying, if you're in SIMV and you need to increase minute ventilation, we know we can increase minute ventilation by taking the respiratory rate up, or the pressure up if you're in pressure control, or the volume up if you're in volume control. But for those, if the patient is breathing significantly over that rate, you can add a little bit more pressure support. So if I take that from 5 to 10 and I trigger some additional breaths, I'm getting a little bit bigger tidal volume on those spontaneous breaths. By that one's reading 200 cc's or 0.2 liters. Now, right quickly, because I know I'm getting a little over time with this ventilator, or with this video, I'll do another one in just a moment, but I am going to switch modes. So I'm going to go to assist control, pressure control, and I want you to notice what's going to happen down here when assist control, pressure control gets activated. Mode accept. Everything else stayed the same, but now that pressure support button is gone. So with SIMV pressure control or an SIMV ventilation, the patient's going to receive a set amount of breaths per minute with the amount of pressure that was set. In this case, it was 18. And that patient can breathe spontaneously in between, with those breaths being supported with pressure support. So ultimately, this machine is going to say every breath, or every 10 seconds, I'll give you a breath. If you want breaths in between, you can have what you can get with this pressure support amount that the user dialed in. In assist control, pressure control, patient is going to get 10 breaths per minute at 18 centimeters of water pressure and the PEEP level. And this patient has the ability to trigger additional breaths, but those additional breaths above 10 will still be machine breaths, mandatory breaths, controlled breaths, however you want to look at that. They'll all still be delivered at 18 centimeters of water pressure and what the PEEP level is set. or whatever your inspiratory pressure is set and whatever your peak level is set at. Those are still going to be, and the eye time associated with that too. So we'll just try to see if we can see that here. So I can trigger a breath. And now the only thing really that's going to change up, you'll notice in the bottom left-hand corner, that spontaneous minute ventilation, although I'm triggering additional breaths, that spontaneous minute ventilation is 0.0 because the patient triggered these breaths, but they're not spontaneous breaths. Yes, the patient spontaneously triggered them, but the patient's basically saying, hey, telling the ventilator, I would like another breath. Will you please give it to me? We'll go on and do another one here in just a second.